A queen's most private moment was a public spectacle. After the feast, music, and vows, she was escorted to the bridal chamber not for solitude, but surrounded by a crowd of powerful nobles and watching clergy. This was the medieval bedding ceremony, and its most shocking element was the public witness to the marriage's consummation. By the end of this journey, you will understand the true cost of crown and dynasty, revealed through the intimate fears of queens. We will uncover why this bizarre ritual began, who exactly stood watching in the shadows, and what terrifying scandals unfolded when the ceremony failed. What does it mean when a person's deepest privacy becomes a matter of state? The ritual's roots lie not in spectacle, but in cold, hard necessity. To understand why a queen would endure such an invasion, we must first abandon modern ideas of marriage. In the medieval world, a royal wedding was not a romantic union. It was a living, breathing peace treaty. It was the merger of two armies, the alliance of two treasuries, the binding of two dynasties. The entire political future of a kingdom, and often the peace between nations, rested on a single, fragile outcome, the birth of a legitimate male heir. Everything else, the feasts, the vows, the pageantry, was merely preamble. The real contract was sealed not with a signature, but with the act of consummation. This is where the church stepped in with unyielding authority. Canon law was clear. A marriage required two things to be binding: the free consent of both parties and its physical consummation. Without the second, the first could be undone. A marriage could be annulled, declared invalid, as if it had never happened, and in the high-stakes Game of Thrones, an annulment was a political earthquake. It could dissolve alliances, ignite wars, and throw entire realms into succession crises. So how did a kingdom prove, beyond any doubt or future argument, that the deed was done? They brought in the notaries. The witnesses at the foot of the bed were not there for titillation. They were legal auditors. Imagine a bishop, the highest local authority of the church, standing solemnly in the chamber. His presence transformed a private act into a public sacrament, witnessed by God and man. Alongside him might be a senior noble from the groom's family and another from the bride's, each representing their faction's interests. Sometimes even ambassadors from foreign courts were present, their testimony meant to report back to their own kings, solidifying the new alliance with irrefutable proof. They were there to see, to hear, and to later testify under oath that the marriage had been properly consummated. This testimony was the ultimate legal shield. It prevented a king from later discarding a queen by claiming the marriage was never valid. It blocked rival nobles from challenging the legitimacy of a future prince by whispering that he was a bastard conceived outside of a true marriage. In one brutally practical act, the public bedding ceremony sought to eliminate all future doubt. It turned the queen's body into the ultimate charter, her privacy sacrificed on the altar of political certainty. Yet within this legal fortress, a young woman was utterly alone. The heavy velvet canopy of the bed offered no sanctuary, only a stage. Her most intimate fears were now public property. The first and most profound was the total annihilation of privacy. This was not a moment of whispered affection or tentative discovery, shared between two people learning each other. It was a state function conducted under the unblinking eyes of judges. Every flinch, every moment of hesitation, every sign of discomfort or fear would be noted, analyzed, and later discussed in courtly whispers. She was not a bride, but a performer in a play where the script was written in law and the audience held her future in their hands. Performance anxiety under such a gaze must have been paralyzing. Imagine the pressure, the success of an alliance, the stability of a kingdom, the very purpose of her existence as queen, all hinged on this single act being successfully witnessed. What if the king, perhaps a stranger to her, was unable to perform due to nerves, illness, or simple unwillingness? The humiliation would be catastrophic, falling disproportionately on her. Gossip would not question the king's prowess, it would question her allure, her virtue, or some hidden defect. She would be seen as the failure, the broken link in the dynastic chain. This leads directly to the most terrifying fear of all, the fear of failure with monumental consequences. If the marriage was not consummated, it could be annulled. For the queen, an annulment was not a simple divorce. It was a political death sentence. Stripped of her title and status, she would be sent back to her homeland in disgrace, a living symbol of a failed treaty. Her family might refuse her, seeing her as a diplomatic burden. She would have no secure position, no income, no future. She existed in a state of limbo, neither maiden nor wife, her value utterly spent. The witnesses at the bedside were not just observers, they were the jury in a trial that determined her entire fate. And then there was the raw, physical fear. Medieval medicine offered little understanding or comfort for the wedding night, especially for a young woman, which many queens were. Pain was expected, even seen as proof of virtue, but it was endured without privacy or compassion. There was no gentle guidance, only the pressure of public expectation. Any cry or sign of distress occurred before an audience of stern-faced men who saw not a human being in pain, but a process needing completion. Her body was a territory to be claimed for the dynasty, and her personal experience was the least relevant detail in the entire transaction. The human cost of this political ritual was measured in silent terror behind the curtains, a price paid by queens alone. But who exactly were these silent sentinels in the chamber? The witnessing party was not a random crowd. It was a carefully curated assembly of power, each member serving a specific, strategic purpose. At the head of this solemn group stood a trusted bishop or high-ranking clergyman. His role was to sanctify the act and ensure it adhered to the strict laws of the church. He was the ultimate notary, his word carrying the weight of divine authority. His presence transformed the bed from a piece of furniture into an altar, and the act from a private union into a sacramental one, blessed and recognized by God Himself. His testimony could silence any future ecclesiastical challenge. Flanking him were the political guarantors, senior nobles from both the bride's and the groom's families. These were not chosen for their friendship to the couple, but for their loyalty to their respective dynasties. The noble from the king's side was there to protect his lord's interests, to ensure the queen was truly received. The noble from the queen's family, often a relative, had a far more poignant duty. He was her clan's representative, there to guard against any trickery or force, to bear witness that their royal daughter was treated with the respect due her station. In that tense room, these men embodied the fragile alliance the marriage was meant to seal, watching each other as closely as they watched the bed. In some of the most politically charged unions, especially those between rival kingdoms, foreign diplomats might also be present. A Spanish ambassador at an English royal wedding, for example, served as a neutral observer for his own sovereign. His subsequent dispatch home, confirming the consummation, would be the final piece of diplomatic proof that the treaty was now active, the alliance cemented. With these men in the room, the private act became an international event. The ceremony itself followed a rigid, symbolic script. The bishop would first bless the marriage bed, sprinkling it with holy water. The couple was then prepared for bed in a ritualized undressing. This was typically modest, with the bride and groom being led to the bedchamber already in their nightclothes, or with outer robes removed to reveal simple linen shifts. The focus was on symbolic exposure, not titillation. They were then tucked into the massive bed together, a gesture performed by the highest-ranking witnesses. And then the witnesses withdrew, but here lies a crucial and unsettling detail. They often did not go far. Accounts suggest they retreated only to an adjacent antechamber, leaving the door ajar or remaining just beyond a partially drawn curtain. They were out of direct sight, but they were never out of earshot. This is where the line between witnessing and observing becomes dangerously blurred. The expectation was not necessarily for a visual confirmation, though in some notorious cases that too happened. The expectation was for audible proof. The witnesses listened for the sounds of the marriage being physically completed, the rustle of sheets, the creak of the bed, the murmured words. These were the required evidences. Their sworn testimony later would hinge on what they heard, or claimed to hear in that shadowy space. The Queen's most vulnerable moment was therefore enveloped in a suffocating performance, where even silence could be catastrophic. The ritual demanded proof, and in the quiet of the night, every sound became a piece of legal evidence. History, however, is written in the messy ink of human failure. For all its legal precision, the bedding ceremony was a gamble, and when it went wrong, the consequences echoed through kingdoms. Take the story of Margaret Tudor, the sister of England's King Henry VIII, who married James IV of Scotland in 1503. This was a union meant to forge peace between two perpetually warring nations. The pressure was immense, and the bedding was treated with the gravity of a military campaign. Chronicles record that after the couple was put to bed, the Earl of Bothwell, a powerful Scottish lord, remained by the bedpost all night as the official witness. He stood guard until morning, when he presented the blood-stained sheets to the assembled court as proof of the Queen's virginity and the marriage's completion. Margaret was just 14 years old. Her successful consummation was not a private milestone, but a publicly verified clause in a peace treaty, her body the living parchment. Contrast this with one of history's most famous marital disasters, the union of Louis VII of France and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Their marriage ended in annulment, and while the specific details of their bedding are lost, the shadow of non-consummation loomed large. After 15 years of marriage and 2 daughters, Louis sought to have the marriage dissolved. The official grounds were consanguinity, meaning they were too closely related. But whispers at the time, and many historians since, point to another, more personal reason. It was said that Louis, deeply pious and perhaps more monk than king, was an inattentive husband. Eleanor herself reportedly complained she had married a monk, not a monarch. The lack of a male heir after so many years fueled rumors that the marriage had never been properly consummated, or that Louis was simply incapable. When the annulment was finally granted, it wasn't just a personal separation. Eleanor, the wealthiest duchess in Europe, took her vast lands of Aquitaine out of the French crown's control and promptly married Henry Plantagenet, who soon became King Henry II of England. This single marital collapse transferred a third of modern France into English hands, setting the stage for centuries of conflict known as the 100 Years' War. The private doubts in a royal bedchamber could literally redraw the map of a continent. Sometimes, the ceremony itself became a tool for political messaging. Look at the marriage of Maria of Aragon to King Manuel I of Portugal in 1500. This was a tightly orchestrated alliance within the powerful Spanish and Portuguese royal families. The public nature of their bedding was emphasized, not hidden, to serve as a powerful announcement to all of Europe. The successful consummation was loudly proclaimed to signal that this new dynastic link was strong, active, and already working toward its ultimate goal, an heir. It was a strategic display of fertility and political health. Then there are the curious cases that defy expectation, like the marriage of Richard II of England to Anne of Bohemia. Their wedding night is noted for its astonishing piety. After an incredibly lavish and public bedding ceremony, the young couple, both around 15, reportedly spent the entire night in prayer together, talking and getting to know one another without consummating the union. This chaste beginning, conducted under the public eye, was seen not as a failure, but as a mark of their virtue and deep mutual respect. It proved that even within this rigid, invasive framework, human connection could sometimes find a quiet, unexpected path. These stories are not ancient gossip. They are the stark, human records of a system where love was an afterthought, and a queen's most vulnerable hour was a matter of national security. The explicit witnessing in the bedchamber did not last forever. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the most invasive part of the ritual began to fade from royal courts. The change was gradual, driven by a shifting sense of decorum and the rising influence of humanist ideas that prized individual dignity. Monarchs, growing ever more powerful and viewing themselves as divinely appointed, began to chafe at this deeply personal intrusion. The act of consummation remained the critical legal requirement, but proving it no longer required a room full of listening nobles. Instead, the proof became more symbolic, yet still agonizingly public. The ritual evolved, but its core purpose, to publicly verify the queen's transition from bride to wife, remained stubbornly intact. One of the most persistent symbols was the formal presentation of the bridal sheets the morning after the wedding. Attended by high-ranking ladies and officials, the sheets would be inspected for the bloodstains that were accepted as proof of the bride's virginity and the marriage's completion. This ceremony, often followed by a celebratory mass, traded the audible witness for a visual one. It was scarcely less humiliating, turning a deeply personal physical experience into a piece of evidence displayed before the court. In some traditions, this evolved into playful, yet pointed, public customs. The practice of throwing the stocking, where wedding guests would toss the bride and groom's stockings at the bed, with the belief that whoever hit the mark would be the next to marry, carried echoes of the old communal involvement in the couple's union. It softened the edges, turning scrutiny into sport, but the ghost of the public bed still lingered in the laughter. For royal brides entering arranged marriages, the crushing pressure of expectation never truly vanished. The explicit witnesses were gone, but an entire court, a nation, and a network of foreign ambassadors now stood in their place. The fear of failure simply transformed. A queen like Catherine of Aragon, who endured multiple pregnancies that ended in stillbirth or infant death, lived under a cloud of public anxiety and pity that was its own kind of torment. Her body was still a territory, its productivity the subject of state reports and diplomatic letters. The wedding night might have become private, but the months and years that followed were a relentless public audit of her womb. The dynasty demanded an heir, and every glance in the corridor, every hushed conversation that stopped when she entered a room, was a reminder of her singular, inescapable duty. So what are we to make of this distant, unsettling practice? The terror of those medieval queens on their wedding nights was not a private anxiety. It was the logical, chilling result of a system that viewed women's bodies as political territory to be mapped, claimed, and verified. Their most intimate privacy was the first sacrifice demanded by the crown. This history forces us to reflect on the brutal intersection of power, gender, and personhood. It asks us to consider how the demands of dynasty and state have, for centuries, written themselves onto the lives of individuals, often at a devastating personal cost. The story of the public bed is more than a bizarre historical footnote. It is a stark window into a world where the line between the sovereign and the self was often brutally erased. Which of these historical figures' stories, from Margaret Tudor to Eleanor of Aquitaine, did you find the most revealing or shocking? Share your thoughts in the comments below.